I didn't call a lawyer, I didn't yell, and I didn't touch his trailer. I just made one phone call, and 2 hours later it was gone. The crazy part is, the guy who put it there had been acting like that piece of land was his for years, and honestly, at first, I almost believed him. So here's what happened. About 6 months ago, I bought this small corner lot right next to my house. Nothing fancy, just a patch of gravel, some stubborn grass, and a couple uneven spots where rainwater liked to sit a little too long. But to me it felt like possibility, like the first real step toward building something with my own hands. I'd been dreaming about putting up a small workshop there, nothing big, just a place where I could fix things, maybe build furniture, get away from the noise of everything else. It wasn't about the size of the land, it was about the fact that it was mine. And if you've ever bought property, even a small piece like that, you know the feeling. You stand there the first time after closing, look around, and think, yeah, this is mine now. No one gets to tell me what happens here. At least, that's what I thought. The neighborhood itself was one of those quiet, older suburban pockets, the kind where people had lived there for decades, where everyone kind of knew everyone, or at least thought they did. I wasn't exactly new. I'd been in my house for a couple years, but that lot had always just been there. Unclaimed and used, kind of invisible. Until I bought it. The day I closed, I remember walking over there with a cup of coffee in my hand, just pacing the edges, mentally mapping out where I might put a workbench, where the door would face, how the sunlight hit in the afternoon. Simple stuff, but it felt good. It felt earned. Then about a week later, I noticed something that didn't sit right. Right in the middle of the lot, like it had been dropped there overnight, was this big white utility trailer. Not small either. I'm talking full-size, dual-axle, the kind contractors use to haul equipment. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't tucked away in a corner, it was parked dead center like it had every right to be there. At first, I actually thought maybe I'd missed something in the paperwork, like maybe there was some kind of easement or shared use agreement, something buried in legal language that I didn't fully understand. Because the confidence of that trailer, it didn't look like a mistake. It looked like habit. So I walked around it, looked for any markings, license plate, company name, anything that might tell me who it belonged to. Nothing obvious. Just a slightly faded white surface, a couple scratches, and a padlock on the back door. And I remember standing there thinking, okay, before I assumed the worst, just go ask around. So I knocked on a few doors. Most people gave me that polite, half-helpful answer. You know the kind. Oh yeah, I've seen that trailer around. Or, I think it belongs to someone down the street. But nobody really wanted to get involved. It took me about 20 minutes before someone finally pointed me toward a guy named Leonard Briggs. Lived 2 houses down, corner of Maple and Ridge. I walked over, knocked on his door, and after a few seconds, he opened it halfway, like I was interrupting something important. Leonard was probably late 50s, maybe early 60s, the kind of guy who had that permanent sunburned look, like he spent a lot of time outside but not necessarily doing anything productive. He looked at me, then past me, like he already knew why I was there. Yeah, he said, short, flat. I kept it friendly. Hey, sorry to bother you. I'm your neighbor over on Ashwood. I just bought the corner lot last week. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. So, there's a trailer parked on it, and someone mentioned it might be yours. He leaned against the doorframe, crossed his arms, and for a second I thought he might apologize, or at least look surprised. He didn't. Oh yeah, he said, like we were talking about the weather, that's mine. There was no hesitation, no explanation, just ownership of the trailer, not the situation. I gave a small nod, still trying to keep things smooth. Got it. Yeah, I just wanted to let you know, I actually own that lot now, so I'll need to have it cleared out. He looked at me for a second, then gave this little shrug, almost amused. We've been using that spot for years, he said. Previous owner didn't care. And there it was. Not anger, not confrontation, just assumption. Like the rules hadn't changed, like ownership didn't really mean anything unless he decided it did. I took a breath, kept my tone even. Yeah, I understand, but it's private property now. I just closed on it, so I'm gonna need the trailer moved. Another shrug. It's not hurting anything. That line stuck with me, not because of what it said, but because of what it ignored. It wasn't about damage, it wasn't about inconvenience, it was about boundaries. And he was acting like mine didn't exist. Still, I didn't push. All right, I said. Well, could you move it sometime this week? He didn't answer right away. just looked at me like he was weighing whether the conversation was even worth finishing. Yeah, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. I remember walking back to my house feeling that weird mix of frustration and doubt, like maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just one of those neighborhood things you had to navigate carefully. Maybe I needed to give it time. So I did. A few days passed, nothing changed. The trailer didn't move an inch. I tried to stay patient, told myself people get busy. Maybe he had other priorities. Maybe he just needed a reminder. So I wrote a simple note, nothing aggressive, just clear. Hi. Just a reminder that this is now private property. Please remove the trailer within the next few days. Thank you. I taped it to the side door. Another few days passed. Still nothing. At that point, it wasn't about the trailer anymore. It was about the way he had looked at me, that casual dismissal, that quiet assumption that I wouldn't actually do anything about it. So I went back, knocked on his door again. This time he took longer to answer, and when he did, there was a slight edge in his voice. Yeah. I kept it calm. Hey, just following up on the trailer. I left a note a few days ago. He exhaled, like I was being unreasonable. I saw it. Okay, so when do you think you can move it? Another pause, longer this time. Then the same shrug. We'll get to it. And that's when something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet realization settling in. He wasn't going to move it. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't think he had to. And right there, standing on his porch, I realized being polite wasn't going to fix this. It was just going to teach him that I could be ignored. So I stopped trying to be patient. And I started paying attention. So I stopped trying to be patient. And I started paying attention. Not in an emotional way. Not pacing around my house getting worked up. But in a quiet, deliberate way. The kind where you sit down, open your laptop, and decide you're going to understand exactly what your options are before you make your next move. Because up until that point, everything I'd done had been based on courtesy, and courtesy only works when both people are playing by the same rules. Leonard wasn't. That much was clear. So that night, instead of knocking on another door or leaving another note, I pulled up the county website. Zoning regulations, property ordinances, vehicle storage rules. All the stuff most people never read unless they absolutely have to. It wasn't exciting, it wasn't fast, and honestly, half of it felt like it was written in a language designed to make you give up halfway through, but I didn't. I read everything. And somewhere between legal definitions and enforcement clauses, I found the line that mattered: unauthorized vehicles on private property could be removed by a licensed towing company, as long as proper notice had been given. Not verbal notice, not neighborly conversation, posted notice. Visible, documented, and left in place for a minimum of 72 hours. 72 hours. That number stuck. Because suddenly, this wasn't about arguing with Leonard anymore. It was about following a process. A simple, boring, completely legal process that didn't require his agreement. And that changed everything. The next morning, I drove into town and ordered 2 official tow warning signs. Not handwritten, not something I printed at home. Real signs, bright, impossible to ignore. Private property. Tow zone. Unauthorized vehicles will be removed at owner's expense. Big red letters, reflective surface, the kind that makes it very clear you're not bluffing. The guy at the counter asked if I needed stakes for mounting them. I said yes without hesitation. When I got back, I didn't rush. I took my time, measured where they would be most visible, one near the front edge of the lot, the other closer to the side entrance, spots you couldn't miss unless you were actively trying not to see them. And as I was installing the first one, hammer in hand, I noticed movement across the street. A woman I'd seen a few times before. Older, maybe mid-60s, always out tending to her plants. The kind of person who notices everything but doesn't always say it out loud. She watched me for a minute, then walked over slowly. "You finally doing something about that trailer?" she asked, not unkindly, just curious. I nodded. Yeah, figured it was time. She gave a small smile, the kind that carries more meaning than it shows. "Previous owner never bothered," she said. "People got used to using that space." There it was again, that word. Using. Like it had never really belonged to anyone. "Well," I said, tapping the sign into place, "it does now." She looked at the sign, read it carefully, then glanced down the street toward Leonard's house. "He's not gonna like that." I shrugged, not in the same dismissive way Leonard did, but in a quieter, more resolved way. "He doesn't have to like it." She nodded, almost approving, then headed back to her yard without another word. And just like that, the signs were up. Clear, visible, undeniable. I made sure to take photos too, timestamps, angles showing the trailer and the signs in the same frame, not because I expected things to get complicated, but because I'd learned something important the night before. If you're going to do something like this, you do it right. No shortcuts, no gray areas. Then I waited. Day 1, nothing. The trailer sat exactly where it had been, unmoved, like it didn't even recognize the change in its surroundings. Day 2, still nothing. I half expected Leonard to come by, maybe knock on my door, maybe try to push back now that things were getting more official, but he didn't. It was like the signs didn't exist to him, like ignoring them might somehow make them irrelevant. Or maybe he thought I wouldn't follow through. Day 3. I'll admit, I started to wonder if he was testing me, waiting to see if I'd actually go through with it, or if this was just another empty gesture like the note, like the conversations. And part of me, a small part, understood the game. Because in neighborhoods like this, a lot of disputes never go past that stage. People bluff, they posture, they complain, but they don't act. I was about to. The morning of the 4th day, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because I knew what I was going to do, and I wanted to do it clean, without hesitation, before doubt had a chance to creep in. I made coffee, sat down for a minute, looked out the window toward the lot. The trailer was still there, unchanged, stubborn in a way that almost felt intentional. I took a sip, set the cup down, and picked up my phone. The call itself was short. I gave them the address, explained the situation, mentioned the signage and the 72-hour requirement. The person on the other end didn't sound surprised, didn't ask unnecessary questions, just said they'd send a truck out within a couple hours. And that was it. No confrontation, no argument, just a process moving forward. About an hour and a half later, I heard it before I saw it, the low rumble of a flatbed truck turning onto the street, slow, deliberate. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and watched as it pulled up alongside the lot. The driver got out, looked around briefly, then walked over to the signs, read them, nodded to himself, and got to work. There was something almost routine about the way he moved, like this wasn't unusual, like people leaving things where they shouldn't be was just part of his day. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just backed the truck into position, lowered the bed, and started hooking up the trailer with practiced efficiency. Chains, straps, a quick check of the lock. Everything done in a sequence that felt almost mechanical. I didn't say much, just gave him a quick explanation when he glanced my way. Private property, I said, gesturing toward the signs. He nodded. Got it. That was all he needed. Within 20 minutes, maybe less, the trailer was lifted, secured, and sitting on the back of the truck. No drama, no noise, just the quiet finality of something being moved from where it no longer belonged. And as the truck pulled away, I felt something shift again. Not relief exactly, not satisfaction in a loud, triumphant way, more like a quiet settling. Like something that had been out of place was finally corrected. I took another sip of coffee, watched the truck disappear down the street, and turned back toward my house. For a moment, everything was still. The lot was empty. Open. Mine. And I knew, without needing to check the time, that it wouldn't take long before Leonard noticed. What I didn't know was how he'd react when he did. It didn't take long. I'd barely made it halfway through a second cup of coffee when I heard footsteps coming up my driveway. Fast, heavy, not the kind of pace you use when you're just dropping by to chat. I didn't even need to look up to know it was Leonard. There was a certain energy to it, like someone already mid-argument before they've said a word. Then came the knock, sharp, loud, not really a knock so much as an announcement. I opened the door, and there he was, standing a little too close, face flushed, jaw tight, the kind of expression that tells you he's been replaying the situation in his head and didn't like any of the outcomes. "Where's my trailer?" he said. No greeting, no build-up, just straight to it. I leaned against the doorframe, kept my voice level. "Morning." He didn't respond to that, just repeated himself, louder this time. "My trailer. Where is it?" I let a small pause sit there, not to provoke him, just to slow things down. Then I stepped slightly to the side and pointed past him, toward the corner of the lot where the sign was still standing, bright and impossible to miss. It was parked in a posted tow zone. For a second, he didn't move, like his brain had to catch up with what I was saying. Then he turned, followed my gesture, looked at the sign. Actually looked at it this time, not the way people glance at something they've already decided doesn't apply to them. "You actually had it towed?" he said, and there was something different in his voice now, not just anger, but a hint of disbelief, like I'd broken some unspoken rule. I shrugged, but not dismissively, just matter of fact. "I asked you twice," I said. "Left a note. The signs were up for 3 days. Everything was done by the book." He turned back to me, eyes narrowing slightly, searching for something. Maybe a loophole, maybe a way to shift the blame, maybe just trying to figure out if I was bluffing even now. "You could have just talked to me," he said. I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because of how backwards it felt. "I did," I said. "Twice." That landed. Not hard, not dramatic, just enough. He opened his mouth like he was about to argue, then stopped, closed it again, glanced back at the lot, now empty in a way that made the whole situation feel a lot more real. "Where'd they take it?" he asked finally, the edge in his voice dulled just a little. I gave him the name of the towing company, told him they'd have all the information he needed, fees, location, whatever came next. He nodded once, slow, like he didn't have a better option, then looked at me again, and for a brief second, I thought he might say something else, maybe an apology, maybe a complaint, maybe one last attempt to reclaim some kind of upper hand. He didn't. He just turned, walked back down the driveway, and kept going. No slammed doors, no final words, just quiet. And that was it. No more trailer. No more assumptions. No more invisible boundaries being crossed like they didn't matter. The lot stayed empty after that, not just physically, but in a way that felt settled, like the space finally matched the reality of it. I'd walk out there some mornings, coffee in hand, just stand for a minute, not really doing anything, just appreciating the quiet. And yeah, I eventually started working on that workshop, slow at first, weekends mostly, figuring things out as I went. Nothing about it was rushed, nothing forced, which, in a strange way, made it better. Because now, every piece of it felt earned. Not just built, earned. Leonard and I, we didn't become friends. But something did change. A couple weeks after everything happened, I saw him out front while I was getting the mail. We made eye contact, that brief, unavoidable kind. And instead of looking away or pretending the other didn't exist, he gave a small nod. Not warm, not cold, just acknowledgement. I nodded back. And that was enough. No more issues after that. No more using spaces that didn't belong to him. No more casual oversteps. It was like that one moment, that one decision, had reset something, not just for him, but for the whole street. People started being a little more mindful, a little more aware of where lines actually were. And I thought about that more than I expected. Because the truth is, this wasn't really about a trailer. It wasn't about inconvenience, or even property, not entirely. It was about how easy it is for people to blur boundaries when no one pushes back. How quickly no one minds turns into no one owns this. And how that assumption just keeps growing until someone decides to interrupt it. For a while, I wondered if I'd gone too far, if maybe I could have handled it differently, been more patient, given him more time. But every time that thought came up, I'd go back to the same place, the conversations we'd had, the way he'd shrugged it off, the way he'd decided, without asking, that my ownership didn't really count. And that's the part that mattered. Because there's a difference between being understanding and being ignored. One builds relationships, the other erases boundaries. And once I saw that clearly, the decision didn't feel harsh anymore. It felt necessary. Still, I know not everyone would have handled it the same way. Some people would have let it go longer. Some might have escalated faster. Some might have turned it into a full-blown neighborhood war with complaints, arguments, maybe even lawyers. I didn't want any of that. I just wanted my space to be respected. So I followed the rules, all of them, and let the process do what it was designed to do. Simple as that. But here's the thing I keep coming back to, and I'm genuinely curious what you think. If you were in that situation, if someone treated your property like it was theirs, not aggressively, not violently, just casually, like your ownership was more of a suggestion than a fact, how far would you go before you pushed back? Would you have done the same thing? Or would you have handled it differently? Because depending on who you ask, what I did was either completely reasonable or completely over the line. And I think that line, where patience ends and action begins, is a lot more personal than people like to admit. So tell me, where is it for you?